Have you ever wondered why some people seem to easily have success and continue to have success while people that are failing in their finances seem to continue to fail? Well, in this video, we're going to be covering the top 5 steps you could take right now to improve your finances, your net worth, and your overall trajectory for your growth of your money. Sometimes people buy things that are super nice cars, super nice clothes, designer bags, watches, or things like that. And some of those things are potentially investments, but most of them are liabilities. However, some of them might be liabilities that are marketing potentially for you as a professional to make more money. And those types of investments can be okay, but what I like to optimize for is freedom. So when we're looking at liabilities, this really stems from knowing the difference between good debts and bad debts. So you got liabilities. You have good debts and bad debt. So knowing the difference for these is the difference between being able to invest in things that or buy things that will bring you more money and things that will ultimately suck money out of your bank account. So bad debt, there's a couple things. This would include credit cards. Usually, credit cards will be bad. The only time when a credit card can potentially be good, and this is kind of the only instance I've seen, is that you have, let's say, an investment in real estate and you're buying a property in order to, let's say, fix it up and then sell it for a profit. If you're really experienced at saying, like, fixing up and making the property nice again, then it could make sense to first initially buy it with your own money or buy it with a loan. But in order to do the repairs, use like a 0% interest credit card, 10 to 15 months. But the only reason that would make sense is if it's a cash flowing property. So something that you're going to then sell for a profit after that, or that you're going to have equity to then increase the equity so much that you can pay off that debt and just roll it into a mortgage. So bad debts, you're going to have, if you want to spend money on material things, that is definitely going to be, usually, that's going to be your cars. It's going to be, let's call it designer, and maybe even eating out, things like this. Now, it's fine to buy these things, but we'll talk about how to like get into a mindset of spending on these things in the way that keeps you on top of your finances. But if you're spending money on material things, cars, designer, eating out, maybe it's taking loans or credit cards on things that could be like travel, for example, is going to usually lead to, unless you're paying it off right away, something that's going to be not good. So those are like the biggest pitfalls, and definitely borrowing to make speculative investments. Don't want to do that. So that includes like margin or things like that. So when it comes to good debts, that would be like, let's say, like loan on property. Also, a good type of debt is loans. This is actually not even liabilities, but on like loans that people pay you. So income from loans. Good debt would be debt that gives you gives you more cash. So taking out a mortgage is fine if it means that the cash flow you're going to get is greater than that of the mortgage. Things like that. So just basically buying what you don't need. A lot of people also eat out more than they should. We have an account specifically for that that is based on it's our play account. And how that works is over here. Whenever we make money, usually we put it into assets that produce more income. So when we make money, we usually are going to buy things that immediately produce cash. And if we're buying other things that are liabilities that maybe aren't good debt, loans, mortgage, things like that, it's going to go out here and never come back. And so it's fine that you have to pay for those things. You're always going to have to pay for certain expenses. You're probably going to have some liabilities. And it's fine, but that's why we keep our accounts organized. So we got an expense account. That's for food, liabilities, things like that. This is not 40% today, but at one point it was 40%. We have assets accounts. Those are ones that go to like business, or let's say growing our team, or potentially buying assets in stocks and real estate. And then here we have long term. That might be like long term cash or long term investments in index funds or in cryptocurrency or things like that. Then you have taxes. So we do set aside money for taxes, and usually we can offset it so we don't owe anything. However, we set aside that money. And you do have to set aside that money usually if you have an LLC. If you have a paycheck, it probably gets taken out, and then you get your tax return at the end of the year. Now, the other one is play. So we have a designated account for play and a designated account for education. So that's going to be like books, courses, mentors, even travel and going to events. Now, the play accounts is like that guilt-free anything we want. If you want to buy luxury, you buy luxury. If you want to buy the nice car, you buy the nice car. If you want sports, things that are super fun, sports events or traveling, we could do that. And then we have a give account. So that's where we go charity. It's for tipping. Like, I love to tip, and nowadays we tip more than we used to tip. But when I was broke, I honestly wouldn't tip anything because I didn't have money. If I'm broke and I'm barely making enough in a play account to pay for a meal, then I'm not going to tip a ton of money. It's like I already paid for the meal. Now, would I like to be able to compensate that person more? Yeah. And so as the give account grows, I'm able to give out more of my money in tips, and that's the way that I see it. I think 20% is classy, and it's a good way to go for tipping. But when I was starting out and I was broke, I didn't do that. I tipped 5% or something. You might get dirty looks or whatever, but everybody's starting from a different financial place. And ultimately, by doing that later on, nowadays, we can tip 25 or 30%. Feel totally fine doing so. And it's better because we have the money to do it and there's no stress around it. We don't go out, eat, get the tip and be like, oh my gosh, should I tip or not? It's not something that happens. Now, I was sitting on a plane, and I was sitting next to a guy who was telling me about how he converts all of his money into crypto. And he was telling me, I put all my money into crypto and all my money into Bitcoin. And I thought it was interesting. And after doing that, I did some research. And this brings us to number 3, which is going to be the assets allocation. So rather than holding cash, this gentleman I was talking to was putting all his money into Bitcoin, right? Now it's worked out good for him. It's an interesting investment. I personally believe that in the future, a lot of tech will rely on crypto, but it doesn't necessarily have to be crypto. In fact, that's what he said. He said, if you are, and this is a millionaire, just so happened to be, He said, if you are investing, the first thing you need to do is have asset allocation. And I was pretty young at the time. Actually, it was really impactful for me. I was just reading The Richest Man in Babylon, where he talks about, save 10% or 20% of what you earn. And this is where, like, okay, so you're not spending money on things you don't need. Where are you spending your money? This is where the focus comes in. You want to allocate to things that are assets. Why do we buy assets? Because assets are protected from inflation, corruption, manipulation. Now, can these things maybe momentarily affect it? Yeah. But people freak out. They say, oh my gosh, inflation's hitting. What do I do? Well, the last thing you want to do is hold cash. You want tangible assets. So, the best thing that you can do in any economic environment is to secure assets. So, this is going to include assets that go up when inflation hits. It's going to be stocks, it's going to be Bitcoin, it's going to be real estate, it's going to be value creating companies, and it's going to be minerals, and definitely business, a problem solving business. How much do you want to allocate? Well, Richest Man in Babylon says 10%. Most millionaires allocate a large portion of their net worth. They spend less on liabilities like car payments and as much as they can on things that are going to increase their income. And usually you're shooting here for a minimum of 10%. Minimum of 10% into assets. And so long as you do that, and we like to use the JAR system, that's what I do, and our assets are more like 20, 25%, long-term 10%. Then we have, the expenses and what have you, but usually minimum 10% asset allocation. Now, you could break down some of these into like multiple things. Like if you go to stocks, you're most likely going to look at different markets. You're going to have AI, you're going to have index, you're going to have, I think a good place to be would be like semiconductors. You're going to look probably at quantum computing if you're looking at the future of tech. Probably looking at space companies. Probably looking at energy. And these are kind of the industries that we like to look at, right? So tech. I like the living essentials if you're going ultra conservative. And that really is about it. So asset allocation, at least 10% of what you earn. Number 4 is going to be having a clear feeling that things will work out. Money is one of those things that if you are stressing, it's not coming to you. If you're freaking out about it, you're probably going to lose it. And so when it comes to money, I like to always make sure that I have a good money relationship. People are like, well, that's so guru garu. Why would you worry about the relationship with money? Don't we just have to make money and save money and all that? I mean, yeah, I mean, that's rule number zero. You have to make money, increase your income as much as you can. Don't have to worry about number one, about spending on what you don't need. If you make a ton of money, but it doesn't mean you should spend more if you make more, but you get it. But good money relationship means that I can spend money and I can invest money and I can talk about money. How many of you guys have been in a position where when you're growing up, they like they'd say no talking about money at the dinner table. There you talk about the bills and everybody gets kind of tense. You talk about the rent and people start to tighten up. That was the opposite of what I wanted to have in my life when I was growing up. And I remember like every time I'd hear my parents growing up, they would always be like, "Oh, the mortgage this and the rent this and 2008 and all those things." And I remember like every time my dad would talk about bills, it would become this like anger thing where he would be like upset. And I read like a pretty young age, probably around like 15, 16 years old, that like when you talk about money with your family, you're like, you should openly say, let's all talk about money and have it at the dinner table. And like, that's the topic. And openly talk about the bills, openly talk about the mortgage, openly talk about the spending, the income, because that's what makes you focused on solutions for those things. And so when you hide it under the mat, you never figure out how to get rich. If you're talking about it, you continue to build out these systems of beliefs and that it's a positive thing to talk about. It's a productive conversation. Things start to lighten up. So, talking positively about money is so important because like if you are thinking negatively about money, you will attract less money. You will literally money will not come to you as much. But if you're talking positively about money, you focus on the flow of money. And by focusing on the flow of money, you identify where to get it and how to keep it. When you talk about it, you say, we have this bill and this. Do we need that? No, we don't need that. Okay, so let's stop paying that. Okay, so we're making this much. That's how much coming in. We're making that much. How can we increase that? Blah, blah, blah. Now you're starting to identify the flow of money and you attract more by thinking about the positive outcomes around either the spending or the income. And this is where most people mess up because they talk for a second about, I'm about to make some money or I just made $1,000. And then the next thing that comes out of their mouth is they say, and I got to spend it all on my rent. How many of you guys have heard that? I just made $1,000. Now I got to spend it on my $2,000 rent. Whatever. The problem with that is you're not talking about money in a way that pays you first. If you say, I just made $1,000, what can I do to do more of that and increase that income? Before you say, oh, and I got to pay this, blah, blah, spend some time on the positive and say, and I got to increase this. And then when you look at the income or the debt or the things you got to pay down or things like that, do equally as much time and say, all right, so I'm going to pay this bill and I'm going to pay that. How is that going to affect me? Oh, okay. Well, is that something that I in the future will have to continue to pay? Okay, what's the plan for that if I do? Or you might say, oh, well, I actually don't have to continue to pay that. I don't have to do that. And you could deal with it. And so I think that a lot of people just assume that their expenses are like something they have to pay. But there's a huge percentage of your expenses that you could probably look at and say, well, we could downsize here. We could do this. And the same thing with your income. People look at their income and they assume that their income is fixed. They're like, yep, I make this much per month, and that's how much I'm going to make. And when I get a raise in 5 years or whatever, or if I just keep doing what I'm doing, I'll make this much money. But they don't sit down and write down the ideas of, well, how can I increase that? It sounds almost funny to say, but you have something in your mind. I was reading a study that ChatGPT, what it takes to run ChatGPT in as many neurons or different pathways as it does to run the human mind, which you have, ChatGPT would take literally like the amount of energy of a small house to run all the data centers, like just for you to think. And in order for that to take place, like all you have to do is like you could do that just by sitting here for 5 minutes or less and 2 minutes and think. So think about how you can improve currently what's being done. You know, something that there's this very successful lumber dealer, and every night he would go into a quiet room when they asked how successful he was able to be, even through a Great Depression. He said he goes into a quiet room at night, turns off the lights, sits in a chair, and thinks about how his business will be conducted 5 years from now. And then he tries to do it now. So think, how would your income look 5 years from now? And how can you get there today? How would your spending look 5 years from now? And how can you get there today? What does that have to look like for you to be there? So those are the four things to improve your finances and get you on the right track. From number one of don't buying what you don't need, to number two of building a system to allocate your capital into different accounts for specific things so that you can plan accordingly, pay yourself, and build more prosperity, along with asset allocation, buying into assets rather than holding cash alone, and finding the most profitable niches of each individual asset class. And then number four, good money relationships, having the ability to talk positively about money, come up with new ideas to increase your income or decrease your expenses. So hopefully you enjoyed. If I earned your thumbs up, hit the like button. Do consider subscribing. Speaking of investing in assets, if you ever want to learn how to invest in stocks, in AI, index, semiconductors, quantum companies, space, tech, we'll be there live at Market Open tomorrow. If you want to join us, it's the second link in the description. It's life-changing for you if you're just getting started in stocks and you want to learn how to invest in the tech industry and this AI boom that we're in right now, as I trade there every morning at Market Open at 6:30 a.m. in the morning Pacific Standard Time. So if you want to join us there, it's the second link below. If you enjoyed, do consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.